In part 1 of this series, I showed you how I did all the framing for the chicken coop, made the nesting boxes, the waste drawers, as well as the roosting bars. If you missed that video and would like to get caught up, there is a link down in the description. All right, now let's get on to the new stuff. I started out by making the sliding windows for both of the sides. I made a very simple railing system with some 2x4s that were in place. Then you can see my window is a sheet of plywood with a handle attached. I went ahead and placed the handle on the inside to keep the outside of the coop looking nice and clean. And honestly, if you think about it, these will be open during the summer and then closed during the winter. So it isn't like these windows are going to be needing to be opened and closed on a daily basis. And this will probably make more sense later on when I have the siding attached and actually have a window to expose or cover up. Next, I moved on to making and installing a railing system for the waste drawers. It would have been very expensive to use some off-the-shelf hardware for something of not only this depth, but also the needed weight capacity. So instead, I made my own with some cut-up 2x4s. I attached a tong to both sides of the drawer, and then attached a 2x4 to the coop portion in order to not only keep it in line, but to also allow the drawer to be pulled almost the entire way out without falling to the ground. I then moved on to making the trusses and getting started on the roof. As you can see, I made a very quick and simple jig to try to make joining the trusses very easy. I would first butt the 2 rafters together and then attach them using a self-made gusset, just out of 1/2-inch material. After putting screws into one side of the gusset, I would make sure to look at not only the bottom but also the top of the 2 rafters to make sure that they were joined tightly together before attaching the other side. After getting one side complete, I would flip it over and attach a gusset to the other side as well. I then set it aside and repeated until I had all of my trusses made. When it came time to attach the trusses to the coop, I would move up a few at a time and just let them hang upside down. That way they're easily accessible. And you can see that vertical 2x4 I also placed. I made sure that this was dead plumb before attaching my very first truss. And this was just to stabilize it and give it support while I was building out the roof. I also repeated this 2x4 piece on the other end of the chicken coop. And this way, I could pull a string line from one to the other and make sure that it was not only level, but also give me a reference on where I should be setting each peak of each truss so that at the end of it, they were all in a very straight line. I'm not sure what the pros do, but this is what made sense to me. So my personal process would be to set a truss and then set the bird blocking, which is that 2x4 piece that you see right there at the eave. I first started off nailing these bird blocking pieces in from the inside. However, if the nails shot out, then you could see it from the outside of the coop. So I very quickly switched to shooting these in from the outside. And it was kind of quick work while I was working on the coop portion. But once I got into the run portion and had to switch to only working on ladders, it drastically slowed down the process. The next thing was to start setting all of the purlins, which is the intermediate horizontal supports in between the rafters. And again, you see those string lines. I pulled 4 individual string lines to give me a reference on where these purlins needed to be set. As a roof choice, I'm going with Ondura, which is a asphalt corrugated material made by On The Line. You can find the material at pretty much any one of the local big box stores. And it's attached by using specialty nails that has a rubber grommet at the head. What I would do is get the sheet started with a few nails in place. Then I would pull a chalk line across the purlins so I knew where to drive in my nails. To prevent birds or insects from being able to get up inside of the corrugations and either access the coop or nest inside, I would apply a closure strip at the eaves. Whenever it came time to add a new sheet, I would overlap the panels by one corrugation and then repeat the nailing process. I would drive in a nail at every corrugation on the eave and then every other corrugation along the purlins. As you can see, I left my panels full length whenever I was attaching them to the roof because I thought it would be easiest just to come back with a circular saw and make one cut. However, note that you can very well cut these before attaching them to the roof. It was a little tricky getting a string line pulled, but hey, I got it figured out. Is it doing good?
Yeah, you're doing good. You look like one of those little characters from the Labyrinth. Yum, 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 yum.
Now, it's probably not recommended that you get up on the roof and stomp around on it with a circular saw. However, I'm light enough that I don't actually dent the corrugations. So instead of walking around on a ladder trying to cut this, I simply hopped up on the roof and scooted along with my circular saw to make this cut. Really utilizing the laser guide on my circular saw here. The last step to complete the roof is to come back with the ridge cap. Once again, placing those closure strips underneath the ridge caps, just so nothing can get in those corrugations. Woohoo! Another major step down. Okay, now on to cladding this thing with some siding. This is a very simple step, but it is very time consuming because you're having to piecemeal parts together in order to completely clad the sides. I'm using T111 tongue and groove siding here, and I'm placing the grooves vertical. So whenever making all of my cuts, I'm not only aiming for continuous groove lines, but I'm also having to make sure that I'm keeping track of which side has the tongue and which side has the groove on it. That way, if I have to match up two parts like you see here, I can do so. What I would do is take a measurement of the space that I was having to clad, go cut it with my circular saw, and then come back and stick it into place. At this point, I was only siding 3 sides of the coop. This side, the other side, as well as that back portion you see. Because at this point, I still need access to the inside of the coop to do some work. Such as where I need to cut that sliding window location. What I would do is trace out where I need it, then use a circular saw, starting off with a plunge cut to make the actual cut. Well, I used a circular saw for 3 of the cuts, but then used a reciprocating saw for that 4th one, so I wouldn't have to turn my saw upside down. Continuing with making cutouts, I moved on to the back wall, which will have one drop-down door for the drawers to be pulled out, and then 2 giant windows on top of it. I would first line out where I wanted the cutouts to be placed on the inside of the coop, then use a drill bit to make a hole in each one of the corners. This would give me a reference on the outside of the coop that I could then go to with a level, connect the dots, and then use my circular saw to do all of the plunge cuts. After taking care of the drop-down door portion, I repeated the process to make the 2 giant openings for the windows. With all of the openings cut, now I could make the door and the windows. I started off with the door since it was on bottom. After making it and trimming it out on 3 sides, I set it in place and then trimmed out that 4th side. I could then mount 2 hinges to it as well as a barrel bolt to keep it in place. Now I placed the barrel bolt on the inside, so that will mean that the neighbors have to open up at least one of the windows to unlock the bolt in order to open up this door. But the door is not used that frequently, which is why I chose that placement. Nice. Now these windows are kind of cool. My neighbors really wanted a set of windows where you'd be able to open up one set and there would be a screened window to allow a cross breeze and some ventilation into the coop, but then to also have the ability to open up a larger set of windows and have 100% access to the inside of the coop. I promise that'll make a lot more sense whenever you see it in just a few minutes. But essentially I'm building a pair of windows that both have 2 windows apiece. That interior frame gets skinned in some siding so that it will match the outside coop, but the outside frame gets skinned in wire mesh. And as you can imagine, these are quite heavy whenever they're fully built. Yep. Okay. Once they were set in place, I was able to attach the final trim and all of the hinges to attach it to the coop. And ta-da! Now you can see you can open up both of the windows and have 100% access. And yes, I did come back and paint that 2x4. But then if you just want to open up a window, keep the chickens still inside, but allow some ventilation, then you can just open up the interior frame. I made my tolerances a little tight when building these. A little bit of sanding. I had to come back and do some sanding on them. Since it is Texas, I imagine these inside windows will be left open the majority of the year. There are a ton of pieces to this build, so stay tuned for part 3 where I show you how I put on all of the trim as well as complete everything else needed to call this chicken coop done. I hope that you've enjoyed it so far, and stay tuned if you're interested. I love on you?
Come here. Yeah.
Okay.